Chapter 6, Video 2 will look at the emotional self. As I'm sure many of us know, adolescence is a time of great emotionality. In fact, there's this theory that adolescence emotional well-being is best described as a time of storm and stress. Storm and stress means that teenagers have extreme emotions and extreme emotional fluctuation, where, as I mentioned in the last video, we can experience intense high highs and intense low lows very quickly. So to test this theory, a series of research using a method called ESM looked to see how often teenagers report high and low emotions throughout the day. The ESM study had adolescents respond on their smartphones to a series of recorded prompts throughout the day, where periodically they would receive a notification that asked them to report how they were feeling, and then of course things like who they were with and other environmental factors. We also had adults complete the same series of questions to see if there were a difference between the emotional experiences of teenagers and the emotional experiences of adults. These researchers found that adolescents report feeling self-conscious and embarrassed 2 to 3 times more than the average adult. They also reported greater experiences of feeling awkward, feeling lonely, being nervous, or even being ignored. So, this research suggests that yes, adolescence is in fact a time of storm and stress, of extreme emotions and extreme emotional fluctuation. But why does this happen? As we've talked about, hormones do play a role in the emotional experience of teenagers. But there are actually other biological reasons that motivate this time of storm and stress. Primarily, structural differences in the brain. We know that compared to adults, adolescents have higher activity in the amygdala, or the structure in the brain that's in charge of extreme emotions. To go with that, we see lower activity in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is where we actually do emotional management. It's involved in decision-making, impulse control, personality, and all of these other higher level functionings. So what we're actually seeing is increased activity in the part of the brain that produces extreme emotions and lower activity in the part of the brain that helps us manage those emotions. So coupled together, that produces this period of storm and stress. We also know that when faced with emotional decision-making, adolescents tend to respond with emotion rather than with thought. So in that sense, we know that teenagers respond to emotion with their heart rather than their head. And then, of course, hormone levels, as I mentioned, often play a role here as well. An interesting aspect of the emotional experience of adolescents specifically has to do with how much time they spend alone in their rooms. We know that teenagers see a big increase in the time they spend alone. On average, teenagers actually spend about 1/4 of their time alone, often in their bedroom with the door closed. And while this can be very troublesome to parents, who often comment on them needing to come out of their room, them worrying about how much time their child is spending alone and what they're doing in their rooms, most teenagers spend this alone time as a time of self-reflection. They do report experiencing low mood and feelings of weakness, loneliness, and sadness during that 1/4 of their day that they spend alone in their room. But interestingly enough, we know that after this period of time, the mood actually improves. So it seems like this extreme amount of time teenagers spend by themselves is actually functioning as a way to help them cope with their extreme emotionality. Most teenagers report using many different sources of mood management when enjoying alone time. They'll listen to music, spend time laying on the bed thinking, engage in grooming behaviors like shaving, trying out different hairstyles, trying on different outfits, and so on and so forth. We do see a lot of brooding being reported, as well as texting friends, fantasizing, and then, of course, other similar activities, things like playing music, drawing, reading, watching Netflix, other types of activities that help us actually manage our mood. So, the important takeaway here is that when we're talking about teenagers and their emotional selves, some alone time is good. Not enough alone time, having too much time spent around other people and not having the time to engage in these mood management techniques can actually be bad, can cause lower mood overall. But research also suggests that too much alone time is a bad thing, can be a bad thing. So if a teenager is spending more than a fourth of their day in their room by themselves, that may be the time where you try to draw them out and get them engaging with the world. But if they haven't reached that point, I wouldn't be too concerned. Of course, there are individual differences. Some teenagers need more interaction time. Some teenagers will need less. It's all about finding the amount that's appropriate for the specific individual. One interesting outcome that we know of is that teenagers who are not getting enough alone time or teenagers who are getting too much alone time report higher rates of school problems like low grades and behavioral problems and higher rates of depression. That brings me to the end of video 2. Video 3 will pick up by looking at identity development.